morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Asita De Silva. On behalf of the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Kelaniya in Sri Lanka and the Duke NUS Graduate Medical School in Singapore, it's a great pleasure to welcome our chief guest, Dr. Harsha De Silva, the Honorable State Minister for Policy and Economic Affairs, members of the Cobra Trial Steering Committee, senior officials from the Ministry of Health and the National Research Council, my research partners and collaborators from Duke NUS, with Tazeen, Bangladesh and Pakistan, officials of the WHO and the World Bank, and specialist doctors and clinicians from representing specialist colleges and associations, and all of you to this policy forum on hypertension jointly organized by my university and Duke NUS. It's a great privilege and an honor to have all of you here, and I hope your contribution will help us shape a good policy for managing hypertension, at least at the primary care level in Sri Lanka. As you know, Sri Lanka is an emerging country, and at present, we have a serious challenge with non-communicable diseases. The prevalence of diabetes, 16 to 18%, and 2 national surveys have suggested that the prevalence of hypertension is anything between 25 to 28%. So technically, 1 in 4, 1 in 3 of us would be suffering from high blood pressure. And we all know hypertension is the biggest killer in the world. Sadly, despite having very effective medicines, 5 to 6 classes of antihypertensives, if used appropriately to control blood pressure, and control of blood pressure being acknowledged as a good point to control cardiovascular morbidity and mortality, patients, even in the best centers in the world, don't reach their blood pressure targets. In Sri Lanka, in this region, in fact, it is estimated that only 24% of patients reach their blood pressure targets. 76% don't, in spite of being on treatment. It is in this context that we initiated this trial, Control of Blood Pressure and Risk Attenuation, in collaboration with 3 centers, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka, coordinated by Duke NUS, to find out whether a multi-component intervention consisting but not limited to home health education and door-to-door monitoring of blood pressure and referrals, stepped-up referrals to healthcare centers by trained community health workers, in our context, public health midwives, over and above standard of care, would be more effective and cost-effective at controlling blood pressure 2 years down the line. We are now in our second year, the final year of follow-up. I speak for Sri Lanka, and in Sri Lanka, we are expecting to complete the follow-up, the final follow-up in December this year, slightly ahead of schedule. 850 people altogether in very rural communities in the Putlam district, and similar rural populations in Bangladesh and Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh and Pakistan, which you would hear later during the day. Now, as I said, I speak for Sri Lanka as a country's principal investigator. And of interest to you might be what we have found at baseline, which are published in the American Journal of Hypertension. In comparison to the other 2 countries, the Sri Lankan cohort of 850 people who have been followed up, 80% of them had hypertension at baseline at the time of selection or randomization to the study. They were older, they were more educated, more than 96% had a formal education compared to the other 2 countries. They were richer according to the International Wealth Index. Of course, they were fatter. They had either overweight or obese, according to the BMI criteria that we have used. And 80% were inactive or minimally active. Of course, I must paraphrase that by saying that most of the participants were females in this study, because most of these people live by farming, and the men cannot be found during the day in most of the households. They smoked less than 5% were regular smokers. That is a wonderful achievement. But had, unfortunately, a higher prevalence of chronic diseases, especially diabetes and chronic kidney disease in our country. Funnily, they had access to medicine. They had access to medicine free of charge. They had access to calcium channel blockers. 60% of them on treatment were taking angiotensin receptor blockers. They had access to statins free of charge. So they were more educated, they were richer, and they had access to medicine free of charge. But during the baseline, we found that more than 60% had poorly controlled blood pressure. And that is the problem, in my opinion. And we haven't looked at causality here, but just eyeballing it, more than 65% were showing suboptimal compliance to treatment, and majority of them, the great majority of them, are on monotherapy. If I may just add one line to that, we know that monotherapy is a problem. I just finished a large study in Sri Lanka with the George Institute and published in JAMA about 2-3 weeks ago, where we showed triple therapy, drugs, 3 drugs used at very small, half the dosages given together is much better at achieving blood pressure control earlier and sustaining it long term than standard of care. But now that is our problem, because these patients don't reach their blood pressure target. And I hope this forum will contribute to finding solutions to this national problem, which the Ministry of Health, World Bank, and a lot of other stakeholders, including the specialist colleges, are working on. With that, it gives me great pleasure to invite our chief guest, Dr. Harsha De Silva, Honorable State Minister for National Policy and Economic Affairs, who's very fortunate to have him this morning. He's got to go to Parliament by 10 o'clock, he's told me. He's an economist by training and profession. He's a doctorate from the US. Of course, he got the doctorate from the wrong side of the Atlantic. And he's an Eisenhower Fellow, and he's been in politics only for a very short period of time. And in my opinion, he's still a technocrat. Harsha, can I please invite you to address us?
Thanks. Good morning. Professor Asita De Silva, Professor Tazeen Jaffa, consultants, government officials, researchers. It's in fact a pleasure to be here this morning, even though I had many other things that I could have done this morning. At this time, I decided to do this because I want to send a message to those who are here that the government is serious about the issue that you have all gathered here to discuss, and that we would love to have your feedback to determine how we allocate money for the various things that a government needs to allocate money for. And as the Minister in charge of national policies, we are in the process of prioritizing where we should put money next year, together with the Ministry of Finance. So any input that you can give us would be of great value. Just thought I will speak for a few minutes, ask Professor Asita De Silva what I should speak on, and he's told me a few things that I may touch upon, perhaps that is relevant, so I thought I would do so. But before I do that, you know, we have, I think, pretty decent health indicators in comparison with, you know, even countries that are richer than us in per capita income. Recently released data show that we are 77 out of 189 countries in the Human Development Index. And if you look at the score that we get at 0.77, it is in fact higher than the average of 0.76 for the high HDI countries. So it is, I think, a huge achievement since the 1960s, what successive governments have done in putting money in health and education. Like we were just chatting in the morning, you know, literacy has a lot to do with it. And free health and free education, to the extent possible, has, I believe, you know, resulted in these, I think, pretty excellent outcomes for a country at our level of development. The primary healthcare system in this country is pretty decent, I would think, and particularly in comparison with this region. I was looking at what the issues that regularly come up in terms of things like life expectancy and all of that, and we score very good in all those: life expectancy, maternal mortality, infant mortality. But something that we've been unable to tackle, today being Children's Day, is malnutrition among children. So obviously that is not something that is relevant to this forum, but nevertheless, as health professionals, and I see Susie also, people who are in the policy making positions in the Ministry of Health and others, unsatisfactory on stunting at 17.3% and unsatisfactory at wasting at 21.5%. So it's really something that we need to think about beyond this. And I say this particularly because today is World Children's Day. Of course, the new challenges are the aging population and the rising burden of non-communicable diseases, particularly in this case, high blood pressure. A couple of years ago, I went to see my doctor, which I do once a year because my wife has made me do it. My good friend Doc told me, "Harsha, pretty bad news for you, what I call full option." I say, "What do you mean, Doc?" High blood pressure, cholesterol, okay, you don't have sugar, is still under control, but fatty liver, this, that, other thing. And your job doesn't make this any easier at all. Stressed out from morning till night. He said, so I said, "So Doc, what do I do?" He said, "Man, we got to change these numbers. We got to get you within acceptable limits." I said, "Tell me what to do." And I'm happy to announce that now, 18 months running, I've been able to maintain the 9 kilos I lost. All the indicators have changed, and Professor Asita sees me running in the morning. He runs faster and more than I do, but I am a product of change, having listened to the doctor, and the doctor takes me as an example with others who come and say, "You have to be committed and you have to do what you really have to do if you want to change this." So that's just from personal, but as government, what are we doing? Increased investments in healthcare. So this Sunday's paper has how much we've allocated for healthcare next year. It's only second to defense, which shows the priority the government has placed in health and nutrition. So we are spending about, our budgets are not that big, but we are spending over $1 billion next year in this country on healthcare. Just by government's expenditure on healthcare is going to be over $1 billion, so which comes to about slightly around 1.5% of GDP. But in terms of GDP, that is not enough. We need to actually quadruple that amount. But it's going to take a while because our priorities, we have many other things that we need to do, but let me assure you that we are moving in the right direction. I was looking at the what we call the household income and expenditure survey, which we do once in 3 years, to see how much people spend, as households on various things, on food and on entertainment, on healthcare, on education. And with a mean income of 62,000 Sri Lankan rupees a year, at the last household and income and expenditure survey a couple of years ago, I found it a bit surprising that it was only 2,500 rupees that households on average, that is everyone included, spend. So of course the higher deciles would be spending a lot more and spending a lot in private facilities, but at the lower deciles they are more inclined, I believe, to avail themselves of the free service and medicine they get at the public hospitals. So around 4% is what they spend. Then that's given that, like I said, we continue to